As we are every weekday, Monday through Friday here on Fancred. Sports by Brooks on Fancred. Cam Smith, as always, our producer. Let's get to it. Antonio Brown, you probably haven't seen this footage. We've got the very latest on Antonio Brown, what's going on with him. Unfortunate stuff. We're going to start with a report, a local news report, some video for you to set the scene of what's going on with Antonio Brown right now in South Florida. So, Cam, if we can, run that video of Antonio Brown in that news report.
Player Antonio Brown. We begin with breaking news in the hunt for NFL player Antonio Brown after a violent incident this week in Hollywood. Only CBS 4 News is there when he arrives at jail, but minutes later, he walks out.
There are still many questions tonight. CBS 4's Carrie Codd is live at the Broward County Jail in Fort Lauderdale. Carrie, where is Antonio Brown now?
Well, it appears he remains inside the Broward County Jail. Right around 10 o'clock, Antonio Brown arrived here at the jail. Of course, there's been an arrest warrant out for him since Tuesday on 3 criminal charges out of Hollywood.
Mr. Brown, can you talk about these charges?
Brown arrived at the jail with his lawyers and an entourage. He did not respond to our questions. Brown looked serious and determined. Now, there seemed to be some confusion when he arrived because he walked into the jail, spent a couple of minutes inside, walked out a few minutes later, conferred with his attorney, then walked back into the jail. The criminal charges, of course, stem from an incident at Brown's Hollywood home on Tuesday when a delivery driver tried to deliver some of Brown's items. Police say Brown refused to pay for the delivery, threw a rock at the delivery truck and caused some damage to it. The driver agreed to come back, and when he did, the driver told police Brown grabbed him, pulled on him, and scratched him. Police were called, and when they arrived, investigators say Brown went into his home and did not come out. Tonight, we try to get Brown's side of this story.
Tony, do you want to say anything?
No, I've advised him not to right now, but he's innocent of these charges, and we're hoping he'll get bond tomorrow.
Which charges?
Of all charges.
Not paying the guy?
Now, from the comment there by Brown's attorney about getting bond tomorrow, presumably that means Brown will be spending the night in jail and will go before a judge tomorrow morning. We'll continue to follow this developing story. Live in Fort Lauderdale, Carrie Codd, CBS 4 News Tonight.
This is Sports by Brooks live from Los Angeles. I'm Brooks Melchior, joined Sports by Brooks on Fancred. I'm joined by, of course, Cam Smith, as I always am. And before we continue Antonio Brown coverage for you, I want to remind you, coming up here in a minute or two, we're going to be visiting with Boston Globe and Boston.com sports media columnist Chad Finn, regular and friend of the show. And also we'll talk to Ann Killian of the San Francisco Chronicle. Very happy to have Ann back. And, of course, the 49ers right around the corner, going to the Super Bowl against the Chiefs a week from Sunday. So we're going to be talking to Chad, I'm sure, a little bit about Antonio Brown, but some other things as well. But we want to continue our coverage of Antonio Brown by now showing you some footage you probably haven't seen either, and that is actual footage of him inside the courthouse, handcuffed, and the proceeding between Antonio Brown and the judge early this morning. So, Cam, if you could, roll that tape. Antonio Brown handcuffed inside the courthouse.
Antonio Brown. Counsel, please approach the podium.
Warren Berkeley on behalf of Antonio Brown. Good morning, Judge Buckland. Happy New Year. Eric Schwartz, on behalf of Antonio Brown as well.
Good morning, gentlemen. Good morning, Mr. Brown.
Good morning.
Mr. Brown, you're before the court this morning on count 1, burglary with battery. Count 2, burglary of an unoccupied conveyance, unarmed. Count 3, criminal mischief, $200 under $1,000. First
$200.
I find probable cause, and I will hear from the parties.
Wow.
I'm going to object to relevant. If I can make.
It's only about 2 minutes long.
All right, hold on, gentlemen, hold on. I understand you're both here. I don't want you tag teaming on this. We need these proceedings to go smoothly. This is only a first appearance hearing. We have a large docket to get through. I understand the allegations are very serious, and I understand everything surrounding this case, but this is still a first appearance court, and we're not going to turn this into a full-on testimonial hearing where everyone's presenting evidence and making legal argument. It's not going to happen this morning. In light of the information that has been presented, bond on count 1 will be set at $100,000. The standard bonds on counts 2 and 3 will remain in place. If Mr. Brown does post his monetary bond, he will be placed on pretrial supervision. I'm ordering at this time a level 1 GPS monitor. As we've discussed, his passport will be surrendered to Mr. Schwarzreich, who will hold it in his office under lock and key.
He can be released before then, correct, Judge? It's coming. It's forthcoming, the passport, but he can still be released.
Yes.
Thank you, Judge.
All right. It's also going to be an order of no victim contact. Mr. Brown, so that you understand, no victim contact means no being in the same place at the same time.
Do you
no phone
understand?
Calls, no text messages, no third-party contact, no social media. Do you understand that,
No
sir?
social media. Whoa, draconian.
There's also going to be an order that Mr. Brown possess no weapons, firearms, or ammunition. It's my understanding that he does hold a concealed weapons permit.
So may I say this? I have addressed that, and I spoke to Mr. Linder. I've spoken with his girlfriend. Can we have that? I'm willing to take possession of his firearm and have that surrendered to me, but that's going to be done. I'll call the girlfriend afterwards, but I just want to make sure the order is okay, because if the jail doesn't see the order or confinement status a certain way, that will impede his release. But I am willing to have the girlfriend any weapons that or firearms that are in his possession have sent to me.
That is from TMZ Sports, of course, Robert Littell, Evan Rosenblum and company, Michael Babcock, the whole gang at TMZ Sports doing a great job, hustling unlike the rest of the sports media, and that's why we have those guys on the show all the time. That's why we bring you what they do. TMZ Sports, I highly suggest you follow them on Twitter, but very, very sad proceedings, and we're going to talk more about that as we go along. But now we want to bring in Chad Finn, Boston Globe, Boston.com sports media columnist. And on the heels of just looking at that, I don't want to call it tragic video, kind of almost inevitable video. I want to address that. And there's so many other things to talk about as far as sports media is concerned and what's happening right now in terms of maybe an Eli Manning, a comparison to him and Tom Brady. But first off, Chad, I can't thank you enough for hopping on. Thanks so much.
You bet. Glad to do it anytime.
So just looking at this Antonio Brown thing that's coming out today in the handcuffs, and, you know, I think everybody's kind of looking at this somewhat as an inevitable thing, really sad. But I wanted to ask you, do you think if this was 10 years ago, if we didn't have social media as we have it today, would any of this be going on?
Not to anything close to this degree, for sure, Brooks. I mean, Antonio Brown is kind of the modern worst case scenario of an athlete who's too plugged in. Everything he's done over the last 6 months to a year, he's involved this component of Instagram or Twitter that's just made everything worse for himself, whether it was the little video after he got picked up by the Patriots, or all sorts of comments he's made on there, the comments he made about Robert Kraft, the things he's revealed about Drew Rosenhaus, so that personal text after Rosenhaus dropped him as a client this week. He's mounted his own problems and made them worse just by not being able to unplug and stay off his phone. It was interesting to hear in the court case that he's not allowed to go on social media, because that's going to be a very tough thing for him.
It's funny because I was thinking that's probably the number one stipulation that's most important. You know, you've got the GPS and the anklet and taking away the guns and all the other stuff. Don't contact. But I'm thinking, okay, I'm waiting. Wait for it. There it is. Social media. Thank God. Now we're okay. But so, you know, Eli Manning wrapped things up, I think, on a formal basis earlier today, Chad, with a press conference in which it was very striking. He ended the press conference by saying that being a Giant really was the most important thing to him as he went out, staying with that team, retaining that identity with one team. And when you compare him to Tom Brady, all right, and this is what's been in the back of my mind, though, I know. But when and when we've talked, I've talked to you about this. I've talked to so many other people in your neck of the woods, particularly I just, as an outsider, I think of sports and famous athletes with a singular team like an Eli Manning. That's the way I've always kind of contextualized it, not in the way things have played out with the New England Patriots. So What does it say about the Patriots organization that Tom Brady, and I'm not denigrating it, I'm not criticizing it, but I can't imagine Tom Brady necessarily having a press conference like that, what we saw from Eli Manning today. What does it say about the Patriots organization? And could we someday see a press conference in which Brady does refer to the Patriots in such a context?
It's funny, Brooks. They've actually had press conferences like that on rare occasions, but when they have, Belichick is effusive. He's done it for Troy Brown, who he basically kept around for an extra year, even though it was clear his career was winding down. He was on the 07 Patriots and barely played, but Belichick's respect for him was such that he was on the roster that year. Another guy I did it for was Teddy Bruschi, who had the stroke, came back, played at a pretty high level, and then retired. I think it was a year or two after Brown. He both of those guys, Belichick went out of his way to say great things about. Now, Tom Brady, if he's a Patriot for his entire career, I think that happens with him. Things are tense right now for sure. The big piece that we don't know about Tom Brady's future is what Bill Belichick wants, who he wants his quarterback to be next year, because it's very clear Robert Kraft and the Kraft family wants Tom Brady back. I think if Tom Brady was shot up with true serum right now, he would say he just wants to play for the Patriots his whole career, and he's being sort of nudged into this. And I think Bill Belichick is the real wild card in all this. And we're going to find out between now and March 18th when free agency begins.
What role, if any, did Tom Brady play directly in the departure of Jimmy Garoppolo?
That's an interesting one. We've never really gotten clarity on that since Seth Wickersham's story for ESPN revealed a lot that was going on in that organization, and a lot of it has proven true since. But they also went on to win the Super Bowl that year, and a lot of things were repaired along the way. You know, relationships that may have had tension, Belichick, Brady, ended up still leading to the winning formula. And again, last year. So we're at the point now where they had a disappointing season. Brady's contract is up for the first time in his career, so it's this real crossroads. But I think ideally, if you got everybody in the room and they talk through it, they would say it's still best for us to stick together at least for one more year. But Garoppolo is a real wild card in everything, because Belichick drafted him to replace Brady, and Brady outlasted him. He outlasted Garoppolo's first contract, and Belichick didn't expect that, and he was still playing at a high level. They really had no choice to move on, because Garoppolo is going to free agency. You're not taking up cap room, spending $40 million in cap room for two quarterbacks, one of whom's not going to play unless something happens with the starter. So I think Tom had a small fraction to do with it, but the bigger piece was that they had to move on from Garoppolo or Brady, and they chose Brady.
Is it fair to call Robert Kraft a bystander in this situation?
No, he's not a bystander. He's actually really good in these situations generally. I mean, you look back 2011 when the NFL looked like it was on the verge of a labor stoppage, and he was kind of the guy who mended the fences with the players' union. There's kind of a famous picture that was on the papers up here at the time of him hugging Jeff Saturday, the Colts center, after it was all over, because Kraft's wife Myra had died right around the same time. So it was a very stressful time in his life, and yet he ended up being the uniter, or at least perceived as the uniter, when all of that came together. And he's being asked to do that now. You listen to his comments with Belichick about Brady, and it's clear they don't want him to leave. Ownership doesn't want him to leave. And I think, Brooks, what might happen is Belichick states what he wants, if he hasn't already, whether that's Jared Stidham as a quarterback next year, Teddy Bridgewater as a free agent, whatever it is. And then the Patriots say, well, ownership says we're going to have to overrule you on this one more year with Tom, and then we go from there. And we'll see if that's how it plays out. But I have a really hard time thinking the Crafts are going to allow Brady to play anywhere else.
You are, and we've talked to a lot of very credible people, been around a long time in New England media. You're the first person who suggested that Bob Kraft might overrule Belichick. Seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, my perception has been Belichick's completely in charge. But you think that Bob Kraft does have an active role, a direct role, and that he might step in on this?
One-time thing. I think that's
right.
Probably what it'd be. I mean, Kraft got involved as a young owner and paid for it by losing Bill Parcells. He was involved the joke here was he was out there as a stopwatch during the draft process. I don't know how true that was, but when they drafted Bucky Jones, Kraft supposedly was staying there at the combine, timing him in the 40s. So he was very involved on the football side and learned his lesson from Parcells leaving and going to the Jets the way he did. And after he hired Belichick to replace Pete Carroll, who was here for 3 years, he's left Belichick alone and let him handle all the personnel matters. Drew Bledsoe had signed a $103 million contract with the Patriots in 2001. He was the Krafts talk about Brady as being their fourth son or fifth son or whatever it is. They talked about Drew Bledsoe in the same way, and he was a Buffalo Bill in 2002. So there are points, there are endpoints to their loyalty. But with Brady, it's a different case. He's been here 20 years. We know what he's accomplished as a quarterback. He's been a great representative for the most part of the Patriots organization and all of their ideals that they want to put out there. So I think Kraft stayed out of it, but I think this is the one situation where he might say, I'm the boss. And then, maybe that opens a can of worms with Belichick, but I think Belichick probably would not be surprised if that happened either.
Visiting with Chad Finn of the Boston Globe, boston.com, sports media columnist, Globe, Chad Finn, all one word on Twitter. Follow him on Twitter. One more thing, I promise, just one more thing on the Patriots and Tom Brady. As now we're starting to see popping up comparisons between Gronk and Brady. Of course, Gronk and his departure last year, and now we've got the prospect of that with Tom Brady. Are there differences? Are there similarities between Gronk and Tom Brady in this circumstance?
Yeah, Gronk was under contract and Brady isn't. So they were annoyed last year that Gronkowski waited to make his decision because it got in the way of them replacing him. Now, maybe that's kind of an excuse, but the reality is they lost out on having a real shot at Jared Cook because Gronkowski was still wavering. Jared Cook wasn't sure what his role would be if Gronk came back and ended up signing with the Saints and having a Pro Bowl year. The Patriots never had a tight end this year. It was I think they had 16 catches from the position. Just right. A huge, huge drop off because Gronk wavered, or at least didn't tell them what he was doing until it was too late to go out and find any free agent talent anyway. They probably should have drafted one or two. But Brady, he's a free agent. They knew this was coming. They knew his contract was up. And they have no excuse if they don't have plan B in place or plan A if he's not plan A. So that's the major difference is Gronkowski was still a Patriot technically at this point.
Is Tom Brady coming back to the Patriots, Chad?
I still think he is. I mean, I was on a radio show up here last week that I do every week, and they're really plugged in NFL guys. And one of the hosts was saying Tampa Bay is the best fit for him. And yeah, they have great receivers and a good defense, and Bruce Arians is a terrific coach. But can anybody see Tom Brady playing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? I can't. I just can't see him spending 2 years in Raymond James Stadium, whatever it's called now, wearing that helmet and learning a new offense and doing all these things at age 43 like he'll be next season. I still think it makes the most sense to bring him back for a year. And he may not get the money he wants. He's wanted an extension for a couple of years. He hasn't gotten that. He's probably pretty ticked off and feels let down by Belichick about the way this has played out. But the reality is everybody knows that his father in the past has said it's going to end badly. They know how things typically end with superstars in Boston. And maybe it will, but I still think he's got one more year and that they're going to reconcile this.
Let's talk quickly about Eli Manning, because I haven't heard a lot of conversation in the context of Eli Manning, his retirement and broadcasting. Of course, a ton of conversation ongoing with his brother Peyton. But what about Eli? Do you think we could see him in a role as a broadcaster in the NFL?
If he's bored. I mean, he made, what, $232 he's the highest paid player in the
252.
Yeah, 232. I mean, he can go buy his own island and, watch football games and talk to himself in his living room if he wants to in his mansion. He can do whatever he wants at this point. I'll say this. He might not be the most charismatic guy, certainly not like Peyton where it was the dry sense of humor. But when Eli's done commercials, they've been pretty good. He had the one with his football on your phone years ago with his brother. And he has a little bit of a sense of humor that maybe hasn't come out. But, you go back a generation, guys had to do something after their careers were over. Even a guy like Troy Aikman, who's a Hall of Fame quarterback who made a lot of money in his career. It wasn't enough money to say, I'm checking out of everything, I'm done. You got to go do something for the rest of your life. So maybe Eli doesn't end up doing it, but he's given no indication that he's thinking of anything but retirement right now.
It's interesting. His brother, of course, has been nonstop speculation on Monday Night Football and as a broadcaster in general. It hasn't happened. And now all of a sudden, it seems like maybe we're moving on from that with all the rumors about Tony Romo making $14 million. Perhaps he's going to be whisked away by Disney over to Monday Night Football, as I think Disney may try to wrestle away some of those CBS Sunday games as well. But what are your thoughts on Romo staying with CBS, that situation in play, and the prospect of him going maybe to Monday Night Football?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. We'll see. We'll see if ESPN steals his producer away. I think it's Jim Rykoff who really helped him. He and Nance did a bunch of Romo and Nance did a bunch of practice games together before they were ever in the booth for a real game, and the production team and Nance and Romo built up this camaraderie at that point, and then he was an immediate success, a huge hit, probably more so than anybody since John Madden right out of the box, and I think he's got some appreciation for that they prepared him for the role, and that they don't ask him to do too much, and that Nance is a really good straight man for him, if you want to call him that, somebody who sets him up very well and has helped him succeed, has been a part of his success. And I do believe that's going to be a factor for Romo. There's no doubt ESPN's going to try to throw a ton of money at him. They might give him some perks. CBS has most of the golf properties and has allowed him, or may allow him, to miss some Sunday games if he actually qualifies for tournaments as a player. But ESPN will try the same sort of thing with their golf properties. But it's going to be a bidding war, and ultimately, I do think he stays at CBS just out of that sense of loyalty that he's engendered just over the last 3 years there.
What do you see as the future of the Monday Night Football booth for Disney, ABC, ESPN? And for that matter, Disney trying to retain the rights, because those are coming up.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to put it on the ABC. It certainly sounds like that. They're really hungry for a Super Bowl. They want to be in the heavy playoff rotation, not just one game. So they're going to be a player in this when the next contracts are up. I think they're up after 2021, and everything else is up after 2022. So we're going to find out pretty soon what ESPN and ABC's role is going forward. But it's clear they need more punch in the booth. Joe Tessitore is a fantastic college football announcer, well-liked guy, good boxing announcer, but it just hasn't resonated on Monday Night Football. And initially it was because the first year is because Jason Witten just wasn't ready for that. He was there. I don't know what they were trying to capture. It was trying to take another popular Dallas Cowboy and hoping it would be like a success like Romo was. It certainly didn't work. And Booger McFarland, he started out this year, I thought, really well, but he had a really tough playoff game, talking about how they should spike it on, what was it, 4th down or something like that, and just made a lot of mistakes. I'm not sure he's quite ready for that primetime role that he's had for 2 years either. So Manning is their dream. Romo is their dream. And honestly, I think there's probably a better chance Manning ends up there than Romo.
I will say this for Joe Tessitore, and I'm with you on college football, but it seems like he has adjusted his approach to kind of an NFL tone this year, and it was somewhat imperceptible, I think, to a lot of people. And in his defense, when you look at the number of games they had that were abject blowouts, and he's been saddled with, for better for worse, 2 complete novices with this gigantic spotlight. And think about other broadcasters. If they were placed in a situation where they had to fill, they didn't have other games going on. They had these blowouts. They had novice guys with them in what is probably the whitest hot spotlight, to quote Billy Joel, in broadcasting, at least in the National Football League. I think there's something to be said for Joe Tessitore, perhaps kind of, if he can get through this period, becoming a number 1 NFL announcer. And I'm not, a big Joe Tessitore fan. I'm not advocating for him, but I think you really have to look at the externals around him when you assess his performance.
Yeah, the externals, that's a good way of putting it. I mean, it was, they had good games 2 years ago. They had a pretty good stretch of games, but it's a pretty thankless job. I mean, we think of Monday Night Football, if you're not like 25 and younger, we think of it as being still maybe the premier game, but it's not. It doesn't get nearly the ratings the 4:30 window does on CBS or Fox, no matter what the game is. It doesn't have the primetime appeal. Sunday Night Football has been the number one show for 9 years now, I think, in the fall. So it's not that either. It's just it's on cable. They tend not to get the good kind of slate of games that you get in the 4:30 window on Fox, or you get on Sunday Night Football, and so they're kind of playing from behind all the time. And I do agree Tessa's had to deal with a lot of that, and integrating Witten, and bringing out Booger's actual personality. I don't know who the guy is though that you can put with Tessitore, where they're going to have an immediate connection, and it's going to feel like they're old friends, and that they're having a good time in the booth. And you had that back in the Don Meredith days, but it's a really hard thing to find, and I don't know who the guy is that's going to be able to do that.
You know who it could be? Phil Rivers.
Yeah, Phil Rivers.
He could be a Dandy Don. He's a Southern guy, right?
He is. I don't think he's lived the nightlife quite like Dandy Don did, but he's got different values maybe. But yeah, he's got the personality for sure. He's an incredibly charismatic guy.
Visiting with Chad Finn of the Boston Globe, Boston.com, sports media columnist, and I promise I'm gonna ask you about Mookie Betts before we let you out, but we got to get there, but I want to ask you about, because you're someone who's plugged into this stuff, and we haven't got a chance to ask you about, and this is something that never ends. It's the NBA ratings. We've got to have the obligatory discussion about the NBA ratings, and now we can have that discussion in the context of Zion Williamson. So what's your impression? What's your state of the NBA ratings, and what Zion Williams means to that going forward, Chad?
Well, what they get, 23.2 million, something like that. And I had talked to somebody there, one of their PR people beforehand, just offhandedly, who said, yeah, if we got 20 million, would be over the moon. And 23.2 had people pretty happy there, because we're going to see a lot of Zion Williamson now going forward.
Right.
You had all those Golden State games on the books at the start of the year that ended up going down the drain with them being a 10-win team and Steph Curry getting hurt. And you had the most interesting team in the NBA for the last 5 or 6 years suddenly be a non-factor, and they were all over the primetime schedule. Zion, especially with the fourth quarter he had the other day, and living up to the buzz, and just being this incredibly likable character. We're going to see him a lot on ESPN, and I think it actually is going to have an effect on the ratings. Now, they're still digging out of a hole. I mean, having LeBron on the West Coast, and not a lot of compelling teams in the East. The East is good, but none of the teams really thrill you. It's the Bucks are a fantastic team, but no one's tuning in to see the Lopez twins other than Giannis.
Right.
It's a down year for them in that regard. But Zion is going to give them a little bit of a boost. We've already seen that.
So this reminds me a little bit of the Tom Brady situation, how there seems to be somewhat of a disconnect from reality. Maybe it isn't, but this is my impression in the context of, wait a minute, how is Tom Brady not treated in the way Eli Manning has been treated with the Giants? Same thing with Mookie Betts. I'm thinking, why are we having a conversation about the guy getting traded? What's going on with that? Tell us why. Why is this guy on the block in the first place? What do you think is going to happen with Mookie Betts?
Well, I've written 6 columns saying it would be the stupidest thing the Red Sox have done since whatever the last stupid thing they did.
Babe Ruth. Very crazy.
There's a lot of dumb stuff in between, but the readers have made that connection for sure. I mean, Mookie's a beloved player and probably the second best player in baseball, and a great guy. But we've come to this point because a couple of variables have collided. It's Mookie wants to maximize his contract. He has never said a negative word about Boston. He's always said he loves playing here. He's got all kinds of close relationships in the organization, but he wants to make as much money as he can, and that means to him getting to free agency. Now, in my mind, the Red Sox are a fairly prominent organization that could probably pay Mookie Betts, but they're at this point with their salary base where they've been over it significantly the last couple of years, over the luxury tax. They want to reset in this third year and get down below $208 million, which is fine. That's still a big payroll down from $262, I think they were last year. That requires a trim, but that trim doesn't have to be Mookie Betts, and you don't have to do it before the season. You can be at $240 million on your payroll July 6th, and as long as you're down under $208 million by the end of the year, then you're reset, you're clear. So they don't have to do this right now. And you look around, and there's just nothing appealing. There's a rumor out there that they take on Will Myers, who was worth minus 0.3 WAR last year and has $61 million left on his deal, and no top 5 prospects to send Betts and presumably David Price and Nathan Eovaldi to the Padres. Now, as a baseball fan, I look at that trade and throw out all the money factors, and I say that's the most lopsided trade in baseball history. David Price could still be good. Mookie Betts is going into his age 27 season, is unbelievable player. But supposedly that's the sort of thing that's on their radar right now, which is just absurd. And I wish Red Sox fans would fight back a little bit more on it.
Give us a name. Who is internally with the Red Sox responsible for this sort of thinking?
Well, ultimately, it's John Henry. He's the owner, and Tom Werner's the chairman, and the obligatory John Henry also owns the Globe. We always have to put that in our stories. Right. Here too. But they've been the best owners the Red Sox have had. They've won 4 World Series in their tenure, and they hadn't won one since 1918 before. So they know what they're doing, and they've paid for high-priced talent. I mean, Manny Ramirez was a $160 million player, and on and on down the line, they paid Pedro Martinez and signed Carl Crawford, even though that didn't work out. And they've always spent, but resetting is not a bad thing. The Yankees did it a couple of years ago, and look where they are now. But resetting by trading away a guy like Mookie Betts is about as close to the perfect ball player as you can have on the field and off the field. He just happens to want to get paid. That's a huge mistake, and one they would regret for a long time.
By the way, how are you feeling after the dental situation? You feeling all right?
I'm feeling all right, man.
Obviously.
Good drugs these days.
I know. I was thinking, it's like I'm talking to you. There's like an expiration date or moment here, so I didn't want to keep you too long. You're a trooper, man. You are the best. Rub some dirt on it. I can't thank you enough, Chad, for this. It's been outstanding stuff, and you really have caused me to look at this thing a little bit differently with some of the interesting insights you have on all of these intriguing situations. Thanks again.
Thanks, pal. Always great coming on here.
That's Chad Finn of the Boston Globe. And seriously, man, when you talk about looking at the situation involving Tom Brady, it's talked about so much, but very little new information, credible, relevant information bleeds out. And for the first time, and goodness knows, we talked to some great reporters in New England, outside of New England, on specifically on the Brady situation. And that's the first time I've heard from someone in that neck of the woods, obviously who's on the ground, been around a long time, just by the observations that he made, but the ability to elucidate that scenario by mentioning the early tenure of Bob Kraft. When you're trying to figure out what's Bob Kraft doing here, is he a bystander? Because to me, as an outsider looking in, he looks like a bystander. It looks like Belichick's driving the bus here, 100%. And so Chad is the first guy that really has opened my eyes to the idea of Kraft learned his lesson early on, right? With losing Parcells, the Bledsoe scenario. That was his guy, this progression. It's paid off. But at some point, when you look at Kraft's track record, whether it's with coming together with the players union, being the uniter there, right? That personality that he has. Just in general, if you follow him as a person, and I know what everybody's thinking here. I get it. I understand. But when you're trying to assess what's going to happen with Brady, I think it's really interesting that Chad Finn is saying, this is when Kraft probably picks his spot where he steps in and says, okay, our success with Bill Belichick, much of it has been due to this bloodless, pragmatic approach in our assessment of players, treating everyone the same, right? But in the context of the situation involving Tom Brady, at some point, there has to be an adult in the room that finds some sort of happy medium between the way Belichick is approaching it as any other player. And he's not afraid to say that publicly. And that really is, to me, something that is uncalled for in the context of Brady and Eli Manning, which I think the Giants have shown too much loyalty to, in my opinion. I think the Mara family, that is their nature. And you've got a big problem, with the New York Giants if you've got a group of people, a family, the Maras, who aren't particularly great at hiring. Dave Gettleman is, I think, right now the current best example of that. So to their credit, all right, we hired Dave Gettleman. We're going to give him every opportunity. That's great. That's kind of the way it should go. The problem is Dave Gettleman sucks at his job right now, and he just does. They lost Matt Rule and Joe Brady, in my opinion, because of Dave Gettleman. And that stems from the loyalty of the Mara family, and it's on them, right? So the fact that Eli Manning is the highest paid player in the history, has made more money than any player in NFL history, $252 million, right? That's a little absurd. And I think it's a reflection of an ownership that is perhaps too loyal, not perhaps, is too loyal. So what I'm saying is there's got to be a happy medium here with the Patriots between Belichick's approach, the bloodless approach, right? The zero loyalty approach. And I'm not a big loyalty guy anyway, because when loyalty is invoked, usually it's in the context of when it's not deserved, right? You call upon someone's loyalty. That's why it's so associated with the mob, right? You call upon somebody's loyalty when you've done something wrong and they shouldn't stay with you, but you're citing that word as to why they should, right? So between that principle, you've got Bill Belichick and Bob Kraft. There's got to be a middle ground, and there isn't yet with the Patriots. And I think Chad Finn, in providing us some of the background, particularly of Bob Kraft as a person and what he's done publicly with the team and the consequences early on of what he experienced, but his personality profile in general over the years, if you're trying to figure out, is he going to step in here, right? Which no one has really suggested until him to us. And we've talked to a lot of the big players in Boston media, New England media, and we'll continue to do so. In fact, we'll have some more on, because this is a big ongoing story that we're following that I think we'll follow up next week as we go along, because we could wake up at any moment now with Tom Brady being a free agent. He's not under contract like Gronk. So this thing could change overnight. And, Chad was talking about the idea. I can't see him in a Buccaneers uniform. I really can't either. But guess what? I could see Tom Brady in a Raiders uniform. I could. Of course, you could see almost any player in the Raiders uniform if you're old enough to remember the Raiders' reputation. And it's funny, we've got Ann Killian coming up from the San Francisco Chronicle, someone very well-versed in the Raiders organization. And I think it's worth mentioning to her what her thoughts are on that situation. And Derek Carr and, of course, John Gruden, team consummating its move to Las Vegas with a press conference from owner Greg Davis yesterday as the Las Vegas Raiders. But want to focus, obviously, with Ann of the San Francisco Chronicle coming up. We want to focus with her also on the San Francisco 49ers, with the Super Bowl appearance, and talk about some of the things she's been writing about in the San Francisco Chronicle. So we're going to be joined now by Ann Killian of the San Francisco Chronicle as we welcome her back to Sports by Brooks on Fancred. And goodness knows, lots going on as far as it's concerned with the NFL. Between the 49ers and the Raiders. And I can't thank you enough for hopping on. I know this is just an unbelievably crazy time for you. Thanks again.
It's been a little busy. Yeah. We have a football team that's relevant again. That's weird.
Yeah. And it's ironic because, of course, I don't want to ask you about them first. I want to ask you about the Raiders, because the Raiders
are off my radar. They're not my problem anymore.
Right. Exactly. But we just got off the horn with Chad Finn of the Boston Globe, and he was bringing up the fact that he couldn't see, and nobody could see Tom Brady necessarily suiting up for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But what about the Raiders? Do you think that is a possibility, just from what you know about the situation and what you know about Derek Carr's dynamic with John Gruden? Any thoughts on that?
I think Raider fans would like to think it's a possibility. It seems like kind of a long shot to me, but I don't know what Brady and Gruden's relationship is. If Tom Brady thinks that John Gruden is would be fun to be around for a year or two, and if he really thinks the Raiders are that close, which I personally don't, from what I've witnessed, I don't really think they're that close. I don't think Tom Brady is really going to want to go spin his wheels somewhere. I think Tom Brady's motivation for leaving the Patriots would be to prove that he can win without Bill Belichick, and I think he would want a more ready team than maybe the Raiders are. They were pretty awful at times this season. Sometimes they were competitive, but by and large, they were kind of one in another long string of unsuccessful Raider teams. And I don't know that going to Las Vegas is going to magically transform them into something different. Now, you're right about Derek Carr and John Gruden's relationship. I think that, Gruden, despite what he says publicly, seems exasperated by Carr. I think Raider fans are exasperated with Carr. I think Carr did not play well when it counted down the stretch. Derek Carr in Las Vegas seems like a very funny proposition to me. If there's ever a personality that doesn't seem to fit that town, it might be Derek Carr's. But I don't know. I mean, Tom Brady. Now, I do not know the ins and outs of the Rams salary cap situation, but that to me would be going to Los Angeles for either one of those teams would make way more sense because those teams need him to sell tickets. The Raiders don't need Tom Brady to sell tickets. They supposedly have sold plenty of tickets for their new stadium, but the LA teams are opening a brand new palace, and they both kind of stink and are kind of irrelevant in their hometown. So I could see that being something. I could see Giselle wanting to live in LA. I don't know, if she would like to live in Las Vegas, but I have a feeling she'll have a big impact on whatever the decision is. I mean, I think most people are betting that he just ends up back in New England, but I don't know.
It's a fascinating thing. It makes me think the way you describe Derek Carr not really fitting the whole Vegas thing. I think of a family photo, and there's John Gruden, the life of the party guy, the family photo in Vegas, and there's Derek Carr. Derek Carr is the only guy not smiling in the photo. That's the way I think of the Raiders, and that really kind of illuminates the situation as much as anything for me, Ann. So now let's move over, and this kind of relates to Tom Brady, but Jimmy Garoppolo to a certain extent.
Yeah,
I wouldn't say that he's flying under the radar necessarily, but what impact
compared to the other guy in the game? He is.
Yeah, and but in the back of my mind, he could break out, perhaps in the Super Bowl, and eventually, in my mind, he probably will. So talk about what his experience with the Patriots, how it contributes to why perhaps the 49ers are in this spot, or why he's in the spot that he's in as a guy who has led a team to the Super Bowl.
Well, he came to the 49ers with the incredible background of having witnessed what winning is, which very few of these players have done. I mean, Richard Sherman is another one. Emmanuel Sanders to a certain degree with the Broncos, but most of these players are either really young or have been mired in a certain amount of 49er dysfunction. The ones who've been around for a couple of years, they're very few. I mean, John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan have basically turned the whole thing over since they got there. But Jimmy came knowing how to win. Maybe he didn't actually take the snaps, but he was in that culture for years. And, we talked yesterday about his 2 Super Bowl rings that are under lock and key in Chicago back home. Those could be the key to the Super Bowl. He's not overwhelmed by this. And I talked to Steve Young about, who was in a very similar situation. He had 2 rings that he won as a backup before he was able to have the chance to win his own. And he called it, that experience invaluable. Both Jimmy and Steve watched the greatest quarterback of the time, how he conducted himself in the biggest moment of the season, of the biggest moments of his career, and how, Jimmy talked about how Tom treated it just like any other week. How he was his same self and how he was in the moment. And those 2 Super Bowls where Jimmy was his backup, where he never even gotten a snap because they were so close, were 2 of the great, last minute stands that we've seen in recent years. One was the great comeback at the expense of Kyle Shanahan and the Atlanta Falcons, and the other was the win over, you could fault Pete Carroll more than give the win to Tom Brady, but the win over the Seahawks. And Steve, by the same token, saw that, he was on the sidelines when Joe Montana found John Taylor in the end zone in another Miami Super Bowl. And then a year later, he actually got to play almost the entire fourth quarter because the 49ers were blowing out Denver so badly. So I just think witnessing it, knowing how it works, what it's supposed to look like, as opposed to, and I think Patrick Mahomes is fantastic, but he hasn't really witnessed firsthand what it's supposed to be like, what the experience is. So I think, in a weird way, Jimmy has a little bit of an edge, even though he, is not the brightest star in terms of quarterbacks on the Super Bowl stage.
I've got to ask you, and I'm from Kansas City originally. So Kansas City is this centrally focused city, old school Midwestern town where I grew up, and everybody's kind of directly connected in some way. And so I can tell you right now, if you were in Kansas City waiting in the line at an ATM, there's probably a coin flip chance that somebody's just going to bring up the Super Bowl, right? Everywhere you go right now.
Well, the Chiefs fans are, they're one of the greatest fan bases in the NFL, and they are, off the chain about this. And I got that sense going there the last couple of years when Mahomes was on the team, they were just in love with the guy. So yeah, I can imagine that people are pretty excited.
Yeah. And now I've been in Los Angeles for upwards of 20 years. So I kind of understand this amorphous sort of city, which is really a bunch of cities, as part of one thing that is described as a city. So San Francisco has undergone, it's the Bay Area. It's always been the Bay Area, but now you have the 49ers located down in Santa Clara. So is there a different feel to what it's like in the Bay Area and San Francisco with the team down there compared in the past, perhaps as recent as the Steve Young, Joe Montana era?
Yeah, there definitely is a different feel. I'm old enough to remember the very first Super Bowl, and that was kind of the way it is in Kansas City, I imagine. Just, kind of a disbelief, a thrill. And it was very, when the 49ers first went to the Super Bowl, that was a really dark time in San Francisco history. They were coming out of, the Moscone and Milk murders at City Hall, the Jonestown mass murder. All these really dark things had happened in the late 70s. And then all of a sudden this guy, Joe Montana, with like a Hollywood type name, and his super handsome sidekick, Dwight Clark, burst on the scene and kind of just brought the city together and made people feel good in a way that they hadn't felt for a while. So that was a really transformative moment in the city's history. And it was, San Francisco was just such a different place then. It was not the transient city that it is now. It didn't have as many people from other places. It was a real, kind of a homegrown feel to the whole thing. And then as the city started to change through the 80s, the team kind of was a glue that kept it together a little bit. Moving to Santa Clara, a lot of people, I live north of San Francisco. I live right over across the Golden Gate Bridge. People in my area feel pretty divorced from the team, to be honest. It's too far. It's 60 miles from my house. I'm about to get on the freeway and go down there for availability. It's a long way. And, I think people got upset that the York family turned their back on what, all of us who live here consider the heart and soul of the Bay Area, which is San Francisco. At the time, there was plenty of land that they could have built a stadium on. That no longer exists. It's all, taken over by tech companies and hospitals and everything. So there is a different feel to it. Now, we reported today that if they win, which is a very big if, The parade will be in San Francisco, which is kind of, I don't know, it's going to feel different. It's, they are in Santa Clara. Most of those guys live down there. They don't really connect to the city. When the Super Bowl was here, it was so, I don't know if you were here, it was so weird because all the media and all the Super Bowl city, all that fan stuff was all in San Francisco. And then the morning of the game, everyone got on a bus and they were like, I was sitting with other media members and they're like, when are we going to get there? Why is it taking so long? So it's very far away. So it definitely is a different feel than it used to be.
It makes me think about the college football championship game and all the stuff that the Fan Fest stuff was in San Jose. It wasn't in San Francisco. So is the parade going to be on Market Street?
Yeah.
Down to the wharf? Is that the
unless
plan?
Patrick Mahomes has something to say about it, it'll be on Market Street like it was back in the day and the Giants have been. We've had 3 parades. I mean, this has been a pretty magical time for the Bay Area. In the past decade, we've either had a team in the World Series, a team in the NBA Finals, or a team in the Super Bowl in each calendar year, and one team in the Stanley Cup Finals. So it's almost like there's a baton that the Giants passed to the Warriors, and now the Warriors have passed to the 49ers. Right. So it's a good time for the 49ers to be relevant again, and to try and kind of get the city back. In 1981, when they won a Super Bowl, the Raiders were out the door. They were moving that next season. And a lot of Raider fans converted to being 49er fans. They won't tell you that. They'll deny it, but it's true. And I think that could happen again. That I think some of the Raider fans who are being abandoned once more by their team, and this time for good. I would imagine some of them, if they really want to connect to a local NFL team, will probably make the conversion. This 49er team is very likable, there's something about them that is very appealing, unlike, way more so than, say, the Jim Harbaugh teams of the past.
That's right. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Nick Bosa comes off that way, and you've got a lot of interesting dynamic personalities with Sherman there. But I wanted to ask you, and I don't want to keep it too long, but I have to ask you, I mean, this is a basic question, but how did John Lynch and Shanahan do this? And how did they do it seemingly? It may not have seemed like it at the time so quickly.
Well, I think Kyle Shanahan, and more than John Lynch. I mean, John Lynch, Kyle basically hired John, but Kyle had a very specific idea of what he wanted a team to look like, and he and John, worked together. They really, like I said, turned over the roster, and then 2 really big things happened. One is still a mystery to me. Bill Belichick who had said he was not trading Jimmy Garoppolo, right, was all of a sudden willing to trade Jimmy Garoppolo in the middle of the 2017 season. So all of a sudden they had their quarterback. And then early the next year, Jimmy Garoppolo went down with a knee injury. And that, in a way, ended up being a blessing because the team was bad, but the pieces were in place. So they didn't have success, but they were learning how to work together, and they were kind of building the culture, which is really hard to do while you're losing. And I give Shanahan all the credit in the world for that. And yet by being bad, they were able to get Nick Bosa. So a lot of things kind of had to work out perfectly, including Arizona hiring the coach that they did, who then wanted to draft Kyler Murray instead of Nick Bosa. So just kind of a couple of things fell in place for them. But they really had put together this core and kind of they had a vision for what it was going to be like. They thought they would be competitive. I don't think in their wildest dreams did they ever think they'd have this kind of a season so quickly. So it has been kind of overnight.
I don't want to go overboard on the cliche of how great coaches are, but how much of this do you think has to do with Shanahan's personality? Because he comes off as a guy as a guy of certainty, but a guy who has that certainly built out of, his family, number one, with his father and what he's done, but he's got his own enormous resume and just his presence.
Yeah, it's so funny because never have I dealt with someone who is so different than the reputation he came in with. He came in, when he was hired, the word on the street was, this is Mike Shanahan's son. People tossed around the word nepotism when it came to Washington. He was called arrogant and aloof and cocky. And he came in and he's been nothing like that. He is, in terms of NFL coaches, he's a total breath of fresh air. He's very honest, open, humble, funny. Like he doesn't seem to have I'm sure he has a big ego, but it doesn't come across that way. He has a really great way with his players. Like they really like him. You can tell he's somehow built this community together. And I think I dealt with Mike, his dad, a little bit when he was the offensive coordinator for the 49ers. And then, over the years as a head coach in Denver, Kyle seems like a real different person. And so I think he learned a lot from his dad, not only about what to do, but also about what maybe not to do. And I just think he's been, I can't say enough good things about Kyle Shanahan. He's really been, he's the key reason this is all happening.
Last thing for you. What about the Warriors? Are the Warriors going to be a contender anytime? We kind of know what's going on with the injuries and all that, but what's your assessment overview where the Warriors are right now and what's the future look like?
I think that they're going to be a contender next year. Steph should be back in about a month. Clay will be, I don't think Clay will be back this season, but he should be healthy all summer. And I think some of these young players, are going to be really good. They're getting all this great experience. They're starting, and they never thought they would. And then they'll probably get a pretty high draft pick. So I would expect them to. I think this is more of a pause than the end of something. Steph and Clay and Draymond are still in their prime and still the core of that team. And you add another piece or two, and they can be right back in contention.
I'm tempted to invoke the Nick Bosa. The team was bad when it really wasn't bad, and there's NBA fans are like, "Oh, now the Warriors are going to get a high pick. What's that all about with the injuries?" So they're just lucky, but who knows? That's kind of the Lakers syndrome too, I guess. But such an outstanding visit. Thank you so much for all this intel. I really appreciate it, Ann. Thank you.
Sure, thanks for having me.
That's Ann Killian of the San Francisco Chronicle, and of course, covering all things San Francisco. And just like Chad Finn of the Boston Globe, there's some things in there. And one of the big things that I think she mentioned that made me reevaluate Kyle Shanahan and the media to a certain extent is just on its face, her describing, Ann's covered, she's covered NFL coaches for a long time, big time San Francisco stuff. For her to say he came in and he was very different than the way he was portrayed publicly, and what she had heard, for him to come in and be different like that, right? For a reporter who has covered the NFL for a long time, has a lot of experience. That speaks volumes to me when I think about how we look at coverage of the NFL, how we assess coaches and assistant coaches. And when you assess them, especially in the context of a situation like Kyle Shanahan, where he is the son of this famous coach. So there's that natural tendency to ascribe his position to nepotism, of course. And I think we're all of us. It's a human, response, reflex to say, oh, well, it's just his dad. Oh, well, he's automatically arrogant, right? For her to really give us a window into that and give us that insight, and for her to have the experience that she has in that way, that's something that really brings pause to how I look at things now. When you come to understand that, but you can only get that from someone like Ann or Chad or so many other reporters that we've talked to who've been around a long time. And when we stretch things out and we have a relaxed conversation here on Fancred, to which I'm very appreciative that we can, in that conversational environment, start to glean little things, little flecks that all of a sudden, wait a minute, all these things that don't seem to make sense about the Tom Brady situation, about the Mookie Betts situation, which Chad expounded on today, about Kyle Shanahan, Derek Carr, John Gruden, everything that's happening there. So it's really a privilege to get a chance to talk to people who are out there, boots on the ground in the trenches. And then, man, I don't know about you, but listening to Ann talk about San Francisco and the things the city has been through, what it was, what it is today. Just if you can't, be a little nostalgic for the past, and I don't know what to say. More than anything, what it makes me think when you think about talking to reporters in the way that we do is, boy, you wish you had more time to talk to these folks, because there's so much out there to learn about things that when you only hear, the 15-second soundbite, I know it's a cliche, or the tweet. Gronk and Brady, what are the differences? What are the similarities? Should we even pair those things together? Right. And I see it paired together. And then we talk to Chad and say, no, there's a big difference. So, but that's going to do it for today's Sports by Brooks on Fancred. Great job by our producer. As always, Cam Smith. And coming up next week, we will have guests from the Super Bowl. Yes, indeed, we will. Looking forward to it, and we'll continue to break down the Chiefs and the 49ers, and we'll mix in the big stories, which we brought you earlier today with, unfortunately, Antonio Brown in his situation. But for now, that's going to do it. And don't forget, next Monday, we'll be back noon Eastern time, as we always are. And so for our producer, Cam Smith, this is Brooks Melchior live in Los Angeles saying so long. This has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.